What's up guys, welcome back to the Try Time podcast. I'm Matt and today I've gone solo again. This is a bit like the Tony Club Andre Cervello video that I did a few months back now, where I'm going to discuss the key topic in rugby league at the moment and give my thoughts of exactly what I think's going on. And yet again, I've thrown away the script for this one. This is going to be off the cuff initial thoughts, and today's video is going to be on the Salford Red Devils and exactly what is going wrong at Salford. At the time of recording this, sit 11th out of 12 teams in Super League with just one win to their name, kept off bottom by a Lee Centurions side that I think 90% of people don't really feel is ready for Super League. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Now, I'm not going to go into a full tactical analysis of how Salford are playing this year as opposed to last. I don't think anything major has changed, but this isn't the platform for this. And like I said, I'm doing this completely off script, and I'm not watching God knows how many hundreds of hours of Salford matches from the last 2 years to try and determine a difference in the major style. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this season and let's look at actually the games that they have lost. Let's see what's going wrong in terms of that Salford can't be putting wins on the board. And if I look at exactly what's gone on, I look at the sort of teams they've lost to. St Helens away, a very informal FC side at home. They lost in France to Catalan. They did ultimately beat Lee, and that has been their solitary win this season. But yeah, that ultimately seems to be where Salford have currently been. They obviously lost to Castleford. Again, didn't do the job against St Helens or Wigan, and obviously last week it was Warrington who got a big win over Salford, and that takes us into June. So when I list the teams that they've lost to on there, I think the obvious ones that jump out are probably the Castleford fixture, just because that one was at home. That one perhaps more of a winnable match than some of the others. So are things as bad as they seem on the surface? I'd argue no with this one. I think a lot of teams are going to lose to St Helens this year. So far, Catalans are the only ones to avoid that fate. Likewise, they've lost to Wigan by a single point, and Catalans themselves in France. Again, all three of those teams, Saints, Catalan, Wigan, they've only lost once this year, and they are arguably the three best teams in the comp so far this season. So is there much shame in losing to those three? I'd argue not. I then look to Warrington, which was obviously a big defeat for them. In round 8, at the time of recording, this is the last round of fixtures to be played. And again, Warrington are definitely a top 5 side. They maybe don't look quite like they're going to be week in, week out as strong as Saints and Wigan this year, but they're very capable and will be up there at the sharp end of the season. And likewise Castleford. Castleford are not a bad team. They can put some really impressive performances together, and they've got some quality in that squad. So I'd again say that that's not really a game that you'd 9 times out of 10 say Salford win, even on their home turf. I think the only game out there that screams instant win is the home match against Lee, which they did exactly that. Now, before I look any further into the games that are still up and coming for Salford to win, because as we've touched there, there's a few teams, Hull KR, Leeds at home, Wakefield, Huddersfield, they're going to be the games that Salford target as their crucial 4-pointers. I want to look back to last year's start, particularly after 8 rounds, because after 8 rounds last year, it wasn't a much better picture for Salford. They'd only won 2 games all season. They beat Wigan at home, 18 points to 14. Contrast that with this year, they lost 16 points to 17, so again, a very close game. A freak try from Wigan kicked would have won the game last year by 2 points, so again, fine margins. They also beat Hull FC 54-18. Now obviously that was a big turnaround this year, but Hull have definitely been one of the most improved teams in Super League. So, is that quite what it seems on the surface? I don't think so. I think that's more of a testament to the growth that Hull FC have had. Obviously for this, I've excluded the round 2 victory over Toronto on the basis that all of the Wolfpack games were null and void at the time the season finished. But I look at the results here. Round 1, they lost 48-8 to St Helens at home. Sorry, St Helens being at home for that one, I mean. The exact same as round 1 this year, although it was at Headingley. They lost 29-6. So the points difference has swung in their favour. I look at other games they lost. They lost to Huddersfield at home, Leeds at home, Wakefield at home. Again, they lost in the south of France. 30 points to 14 last year, 42-6 this year. So actually again, bigger swing. But Catalans are playing a lot better. So is it more that Catalans have progressed rather than Salford have regressed? Some of the other teams I mentioned on there, they lost to Castleford at home. They lost that last year, 37 points to 30. So, and again, Salford Warrington, this is the biggest swing actually. They beat Warrington by 2 points, 20-18 last season. This year, they got absolutely thumped. They conceded, I think, 60 some points, which 64-12 or something off the top of my head. Salford didn't particularly have a great season last year. So for us to now say that things have gone badly wrong this year is perhaps not quite what it seems on the surface. As we've said there, they had a very shaky start last year. And actually, last year's defeats to the likes of Huddersfield and Wakefield at home were arguably against a weaker standard of opposition than what they have played so far this season. And ultimately, they beat Lee quite convincingly. So I think it's fair to say that in results wise, Salford are not a million miles off last season. But what's that down to? Is that down to an underperformance last year? Or is this the level of the Salford squad? Well, I decided that comparing like for like on fixtures wasn't quite going to give me the full story. So I then wanted to check the squad and particularly the transfers. Now, I want to start with the players that they have lost. The key ones here, Mark Flanagan's called time on his career. I think that's a big loss. Again, there are some big players in here. Tyrone McCarthy's obviously gone to Lee. Good player, not making a huge impact at Lee, but I think would have been interesting to see how he got on at Salford. They'd have certainly wanted to use him. Gil Dudson's a big loss. Solid forward, will get you the meters. He won't ever really get in Dream Team, but equally probably won't let you down too many times either. And then I think these are the big three. As we know, one of the greatest centres in Super League of the last decade, the fantastic Chris Wellham has gone to Featherstone. Joey Lussick was a big loss to Parramatta, and of course Niall Evalds switched to Castleford Tigers. So it's fair to say Salford lost a lot of talent. But is this any harder to overcome than the loss of Jackson Hastings after getting to the grand final in 2019? You know, a team that rebuilt and made the Challenge Cup final last season. Now I am going to caveat this by saying obviously it's a lot more difficult to get to the grand final, and I think 2019 Salford was also considerably better than what we had last year. So with that in mind, I don't necessarily think that the 2020 Salford side was absolutely fantastic, and whilst they did make the Challenge Cup final, they narrowly beat Castle. Well, to be fair, it was narrow all round. They beat Catalans by 4, Warrington by 2, and lost out to Leeds by 1. Compare that to this year's Challenge Cup, where obviously things didn't go too amazing for them. We know they got knocked out by Castleford in what was the quarter final, which, yeah, given the format of the Challenge Cup this year, was kind of where a lot of the Super League teams seemed to pop up. It was an interesting one, but that's by the by. Now we've established that Salford lost a lot of talent, but who have they actually replaced them with? Because in theory, they can build squads. Well, Sebastian Ikiafifo came back on loan. I don't know why they don't just sign him outright, to be honest, to loan him 2 years in a row, but whatever. Night Levels was replacing Morgan Escaré, a player that showed a lot of promise in his early days at Catalan, was good at Wigan when on the pitch. I would say it's a downgrade, but perhaps not a huge one. Certainly not one that on its own would contribute to any part reform from Salford. I think Joe Burgess on the wing is a very smart signing. Is he better than Jake Bibby? Hard to say. I think they have very different strengths. I personally am Jake Bibby's biggest fan as a player, so perhaps I'm not giving him as much credit as what most of the Wigan fans and maybe a few other neutrals would. But again, I certainly don't feel there's anything there that particularly says that should cause a downturn in form. They got some other squad players in: Maddie Costello from Saints, Harvey Levette from Warrington, Danny Addy from Lee, and of course Darcy Lussick from the liquidated Toronto team. On the subject of Toronto, we will get onto them very soon because of a recent signing that's happened. But in terms of the off-season transfers, I think Salford have lost a lot of talent, but they should really have picked up enough to stabilise them where they were. I mean, you got to think 2 wins from 8 is not that difficult target for a Super League club to achieve, and that's all they got last year. I don't think the replacements here are enough of a downgrade to warrant losing a position in the table, not with some of the squad players that they've got in there. Now, if I look away from the new signings into their actual squad itself, in theory it looks okay. You know, I speak through the squad to you, and there's names that stand out: Morgan Escaré, Ken Seo, Chris Naninu, Joe Burgess, Callum Watkins, Tui Lolahea. You know, even going through the forwards: Mossop, Ackers, Ikiafifo, Lannan, Powley. There's some real talent in there. Dan Sargison, Rhys Williams, James Greenwood. This is a squad that in theory should be doing okay. You know, there's plenty more as well. Like I mentioned before, Lussick, Declan Patton's a fantastic acquisition. But where's it going wrong? Because this squad should have won more than one game. Well, for me, Salford's weaknesses is in the halves. I think Kevin Brown has had a very good career, but I question if at 36 he is still a Super League standard half-back. You know, fantastic, carried Widnes for a number of seasons. Maybe didn't do as well as hoped at Warrington at times, but you know, he was still a good enough player. He wasn't really the reason that Warrington underperformed. Then obviously he moved to Lee for a little bit, didn't really play, and then went to Salford. That was of course a Championship Lee side, and that I will point out that was just on loan, but still. I think he's done really well in his career. You know, to play consistently for Wigan, Huddersfield, Warrington, Widnes, all in the top flight, is a big achievement. but at this point he seems to me a bit like a Jamie Ellis sort of player that hovers between the two divisions. I'm then going to touch on his halfback partner Tui Lolohea, who has shown promise in glimpses. However, we saw at his time in Leeds, he didn't really string that together consistently. And that for me is a problem, and one that he hasn't really addressed at Salford. He looked a shadow of Hastings in 2019, that half season they spent together. Again, that's a lot of halfbacks will look a shadow of Jackson Hastings. He is a very good rugby player, but I don't think he stood out the way that Rob Louis did the same. And I think when you look at the contrasting fortunes of how not only they've both got on at Salford but subsequently at Leeds, Tui hasn't done as well as Louis at Salford, and Louis has exceeded Tui at Leeds. That to me says that there's a class difference between the two players, and it's Rob Louis who's the stronger of the pair. And then that kind of kills a lot of the creativity in this squad, because I'm looking through this team here. Andy Ackers is an out and out hooker. He's not a number 9/number 7 in the same way that we've seen other players over the years that can slot in at the halves. He's pure and pure a hooker. In fact, the only other natural halfbacks that you've really got are Declan Padden, who was largely quite strong for Warrington, and Danny Addy, who again is a good player, but his only time really in the top flight came with Bradford in the early 2010s, which was around the time they started to decline, and Hull KR when they hovered between Super League and the Championship, which to me again says he's kind of one of these mid-tier players who on a good season is Super League, on a bad season is Championship level. Now, it's worth pointing out that as of yesterday, at the time of recording, they have lost Callum Watkins for quite a large amount of time and have re-signed Gary Wheeler, a player who has not played rugby in 16 months since Toronto's expulsion from the Super League. That's got to be a problem if you're signing a player who lacks that much match sharpness. And this is concerning for Salford, because these aren't exactly signings that fill the fans with tons of confidence. Now, in terms of what else has changed, the obvious thing here that I have avoided at this point is the coach. Ian Watson has gone to Huddersfield, Richard Marshall has come in, who obviously spent some time at Halifax. He joined as the assistant coach, I think. No, he won't have done. Halifax didn't really play in 2020, that's why. Yeah. So, with that in mind, you can tell I'm doing this off script, can't you? But yeah, with that in mind, I don't really think this is as big of a deal as a lot of people are making out. Huddersfield haven't looked outstanding this year. I think it's fair to say that they obviously are narrowly ahead of the relegation scrap, and as you'll have seen on the channel before, Ian Watson is not really off fraud watch yet. Whereas Marshall won 53% of his games with a Halifax team that is mid-table Championship, a very competitive league in terms of if you're in that mid-table scrap, you could finish in about one of 6 positions. It's very much set. The Championship's an interesting division. It's kind of set into different packs. You've got the promotion pack, the mid-table pack, and the relegation fodder pack. And in those packs is extremely competitive, and it can be difficult to break the lines of that. So to get over a 50% win rate whilst in the scrappy mid-table pack is a good result. Let's not underestimate that. And again, he's come into a Salford squad and only won 1 game less than what Ian Watson did last year. We take a look at his including all competitions, 9 games played, 2 wins, which is a 22% win rate for Salford. I look at Ian Watson's coaching career. He was on 49% at Salford with 80 wins in 164, and since moving to Huddersfield has won 3 in 80 to 38%. So, is there a difference? Yes, there is. Is that difference huge? I wouldn't argue so. I mean, this Salford side came 9th out of 11 last year. Let's not kid ourselves into thinking we're dealing with a grand final winning squad here. They were kept off the bottom of the table by Wakefield, who interestingly didn't do that well. They were only on 26% win rate, and Hull KR, who were frankly very poor last year and were quite lucky to even, I say survive, to be honest, because I think if we'd have had a normal year and Toronto could have kicked on, they could have been in a bit of trouble. I will point out Salford were deducted 3 wins for financial terms, so that did impact their position. They should have, on that basis, finished in 7th place, which would have got them just ahead of Huddersfield's 38.89% win rate. Now, if I look at the teams around them here, let's assume that they are the 7th best team in Super League under Ian Watson. That was last year's position. Huddersfield, I'd say, have stayed the same. Castleford, they've improved. They should be higher up. Wakefield, again, stayed around the same. Hull KR improved. Probably are around Salford's level now. So those 2 positions, Castleford would jump them, Hull KR would be around level. So I think that 9th place position in terms of where they should be in Super League is quite realistic. You'd expect them to be better than Wakefield and Leigh, really. And then that throws one of Huddersfield, Hull KR, Salford into this dogfight. Now, obviously they're behind Wakefield, but Wakefield's wins have come against Huddersfield and Leigh. Salford haven't played Huddersfield yet, so without actually seeing that comparison as to how they will get on, it's difficult to say at this stage whether Wakefield are ahead because they're the better team or because they have had the better run of fixtures. Because we've already mentioned how tough of a start fixture-wise Salford have had. Now, I'm aware I've rambled for 23 minutes now about Salford, a club that I don't particularly have any strong feelings about. So, I think now it's time to hand the discussion over to you. What do you think? What's my summary? Well, I think overall the squad has maybe slightly got worse, but not to the extent that should account for a big decline in terms of the club's form. That being said, there hasn't really been a decline in form. 2 wins from 8 last year, again excluding the Toronto result, and it's worth pointing out actually that this year's win came in round 4. If I look at last year's fixtures again, Salford didn't actually win a game until they beat Wigan at home, which was round 7 of the season. Round 8 was their back-to-back against Hull FC. So actually, up until the last game week against Warrington, they were neck and neck with where they were last year. So I wouldn't say there was a drop-off in form. I think the squad has got slightly worse, yes. But they've had a tougher run of games, which also would explain the drop in the win. Now, again, I don't think the coaching situation is particularly going to impact them a huge amount. I think Marshall is a very underrated coach and will start to show a bit more promise. But we can't particularly judge that until we see Salford take on their other mid-table opponents. their Hull KRs, their Wakefields, their Huddersfields, all games that they are yet to play. So if I was a Salford fan now, and you asked me should they be worried, I'd say you probably should be worried, but not overly concerned for your Super League survival. I think the problem will start to come with two things. Number one, if Salford can win those mid-table games against Huddersfield and Wakefield, and number two, if Lee can get a win against Wakefield this weekend, because depending on the points difference, a big win for Lee would put Salford bottom, and that would throw the cat amongst the pigeons, I think. So that is my summary. Salford fans, be cautious but not concerned at this stage. Revisit the season in a couple of months once you've played a few more winnable games, let's say. If you're still in this relegation scrap, then yes, that's the time to be concerned. But the next month, Hull KR away, Huddersfield away, Leeds at home, July, Wakefield at home. They also finish July off with Hull KR at home as well. I think if we get to round 16, round 17 away at Wakefield, and Salford are still in a relegation scrap with just Lee and Wakefield on whoever for company, that's the time to be concerned. But I think until then, you are quite safe. I do think there will be an uptick in form, and ultimately, I don't think it will be Salford going down. That being said, there's going to need to be some better recruitment for next season, because it's been done on the cheap for far too long, and we all know what happens if you recruit on the cheap. I'm a Leeds fan, Callum's a Bradford fan. We've both watched it happen to our teams, and we've gone from challenging for Super League titles to being in the bottom four, and in Callum's case, relegated. In my case, bloody close to being. So that's my thoughts on the matter. Like I said before, hand the discussion over to you guys. Let me know what you think. And yeah, if you enjoy this kind of video, let me know. They can go on a bit. I am not on the script. But yeah, until next time guys. See you later. Bye.